Lincoln sits down again, trembling on his seat in the Oval Office. He, General George Meade, and a few of his generals look down at a table full of casualty and battle reports. Over the last few days, Lincoln had not eaten nor drank anything. His face looks years older than his age. The sudden death of his beloved son, combined with the multiple failures the Union had against the Confederacy, was taking a toll on him and the Union. He needed a solution. By 1862, the Union Army was running into problems. After the loss at Bull Run in 1861, Union troops were both demoralized and diminishing in numbers. The newly appointed General Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, the Confederates, are literally a doorstep away from Washington, D.C., and any failure to defend the city would be a major setback for the Union, as seen in the Battle of Gettysburg and later Washington, D.C. Although the Union Army expected for the fast and swift victory against the South in the beginning of the war, the reality was much different. However, President Lincoln and the Union government called out for 75,000 more men in July of 1862. Whites, who were almost exclusively the only race that fought on the battlefield in the early stages of the war, were diminishing in numbers and were unwilling to volunteer after seeing the multiple losses suffered by the Union early in the war. Desertion was a massive problem amongst white ranks, as many newly enlisted northern farmers had anticipated for the war to end before harvest season. Their crops were untamed. As a result, desertion was common, especially in the Army of the Potomac, where 9 to 12% of the army was at one point absent without leave. In response to this, President Lincoln took decisive action by sending out two orders in mid-1863. First, he allowed the Civil War Military Draft Act, imposing a draft on white males between the ages of 18 and 26, as well as increasing punishments for deserting. This act, however, was controversial, as rich men only had to pay $300 or pay someone else to avoid the draft. Discontent amongst the masses led to the New York City draft riots in 1863. In the end, the draft was ineffective anyways, as only 46,000 men were drafted directly into the war. Second, he passed General Order No. 143, abolishing the previous ban on black troops, as well as establishing the United States Colored Troops to create 166 black regiments. This was a plan that Lincoln and Congress had wrestled with for a long time, since the beginning of the war. Initially, they planned on using the draft to increase manpower, but in 1863, it became clear that the incorporation of blacks into the army is necessary for manpower. There were many reasons why the Union used to incorporate blacks, but here are a few major ones. First, the Union already had a superiority over the Confederates in every aspect, including factory production, railroads, but mainly population fit to fight. Incorporating blacks into the army could significantly increase that advantage. The Union had 71% of the original population, or approximately 31 million people. The Confederates only had 9 million, including 3.5 million who were enslaved. Union troops, on the other hand, outnumbered Confederate troops 2-1 in total number of enlisted men. The Union had nearly 2.15 million men served in the ranks, whilst the Confederates only had 1.2 million. Moreover, the Confederates had no intention of allowing blacks to fight. Though some blacks served in the production lines as a source of manpower, the Confederate Army was running into similar issues as the Union Army, and blacks could be used as a significant advantage for the Union. Moreover, there were nearly 1 million freed black men in the Union territories, and incorporating them into the war would significantly increase the size of the Union Army. Lincoln also thought of the Emancipation Proclamation that was issued 6 months before, nominally freeing all slaves in rebellious, or in this case, Confederate territories. If blacks were able to fight in the war to free their comrades, they would have much greater motivation to fight than whites. More importantly, the media, which was doubting Lincoln's ability as president in 1862, would see Lincoln's proclamation as a righteous one for good cause, significantly helping Lincoln win the re-election of 1864. Furthermore, some Union armies already had blacks. These soldiers were usually Southern former slaves and were known as contrabands. After the significant increase in the number of these soldiers, Abraham Lincoln thought that if Southern slaves, like contrabands, knew that they could fight for the Union, they would rise up in the masses against their plantation owners who were out at war. As a result, starting in 1863, blacks were allowed to fight for the first time since the American Revolution, and states were allowed to form separate but equal black units. In February of 1863, Massachusetts Governor John A. Andrew was the first to call for black men to fight. More than 1,000 volunteers flocked from Massachusetts, New England, and even Canada, forming the 54th Mass Infantry, one of the most recognized USCT divisions. All the hard work paid off. Following the allowance of blacks to fight in the army, nearly 200,000 free blacks and 10,000 additional contrabands were in the Union Army, fighting valiantly for the freedom of their peers and for final entrance to citizenship. The 54th Mass Infantry spearheaded an assault on the bottleneck that is Fort Wagner in 1863, losing 270 of its 600 men before the assault. This regiment was known all around the country for their valiant efforts to liberate Fort Wagner. This was a pivotal moment for the Union Army during the war, as the view of the public to black soldiers significantly increased. Incorporation of blacks gave many a new reason to fight, one beyond preserving the Union. One, to end centuries of conflict with the black race and slavery. Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist and one of the main recruiters of blacks during the Civil War, said that, "Once let a black man get upon his person the black letters U.S. Let him get an eagle on his button, and a musket on his shoulder, and bullets in his pocket, and there is no power on the earth or under the earth which can deny that he has earned the right of citizenship in the United States." Despite this, there were still many problems that black troops had to encounter. First, the average white Union private was paid $13 a month. However, blacks were to get $7 if they were lucky, $3 being waived for clothing out of the original $10. Furthermore, 90% of black deaths, or 336,000 out of 40,000 total deaths, did not occur on the battlefield. Instead, the majority of blacks died due to ill treatment after. Finally, discrimination was common between whites and blacks, even after the Emancipation Proclamation. Black regiments, however, turned out to be a success in warfare, even after the Civil War. During the First World War, the grandchildren of the first black Civil War fighters would go on the battlefield again in France, fighting valiantly, this time against the Germans. The 369th Infantry Regiment, for example, earned the nickname the Harlem Hellfighters in the eyes of the Germans. It is important not to forget the significance of blacks in the American Civil War and beyond, as it is one of the most important pieces of American military history.